this lesson, we're going to learn about APA references and citations. That's the American Psychological Association style. Now, keep in mind that the style you use for your references is very important. Number one, you've got to be consistent. You have to use the same style throughout. I mean, you can't use one style like APA in one reference or citation, MLA, Modern Language Association, and another, a picture of the book, and another. You have to be consistent throughout. And that consistency is usually dictated by either the class, the instructor, or the school that's studying in. You have to pay attention to those things. What is APA? It's a style composed by the American Psychological Association. It's the most commonly used format for manuscripts in the social sciences. And social sciences are, well, social studies, history, political science, psychology, fields like that. Fields that deal with how people socialize with each other and all the aspects of that. And it regulates the style of the references and the in-text citations. And we had a little look at what those are in a previous lesson, and we will go back over those and take a look at exactly how those are to be formatted, and also the style of the manuscript, that is how it looks on the page. Now, the style or the format in which your references and citations are composed is it's how your reader knows what to look for. If you're using a non-standard style or a different style, your reader doesn't know exactly where to look to find the information. So it's very important, and an incorrect format means that technically you have plagiarized. Now, probably nobody's going to call you up on it, kick you out of school for using the wrong style, or using the style incorrectly, but probably you will be marked down for it. So you'll get a lesser grade than the brilliance of your paper warrants. And remember that technically, up above I used the word technically. Technically is plagiarism. Well, that technicality means you've plagiarized. You have to be careful about this, and that's why we go over this at some length. First, what's the difference between a reference and a citation? A reference is in the list at the end of your paper that includes the sources that you've used in your writing, and it's called a reference section. It just references at the top of the page. And in this, you have complete information as to how your reader can find the articles or books or websites or whatever that you've used, with detailed information how your reader can locate those. Because remember, what you want to do in your writing is you want to provide the reader with a map, as if you will, of how to find out whether what you're claiming is true. And a citation is a short insertion in the body of your paper, in your writing, in your essay, that indicates where a particular quote or fact comes from. And it refers to the references section at the end of the paper. But before we go any further, I'll ask a couple things of you. One, the standard, click like below. Subscribe if you want to learn more and more about writing. I'm putting more and more of these videos online. I've already got a bunch online about various types of writing, and I'm going to be putting even more. So, subscribe. And as well, I'm going to have a promotional offer for Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning environment. They have thousands of classes, and with my offer, you can get a free trial. So please click the offer, sign up, get a free trial to Skillshare, and learn. You can learn all sorts of things. You can learn academic stuff. They have academic topics. They also have fun topics, things that you've always wanted to learn. How to play the guitar, how to do basket weaving, how to macrame, how to plant petunias, whatever you want to do. You can learn it on Skillshare. So click the link below. I have the link below in the description and a little video about Skillshare, more information about Skillshare.
Skillshare is for designers, photographers, marketers, artists, and lifelong learners. Skillshare is for foodies, commuters, risk takers, the young, and the young at heart. It's for strategists, free spirits, purists, the bold, the curious, the characters, the makers, and the breakers. Skillshare is for everyone, an online learning community with thousands of classes to advance your career, improve the world, and pursue the work you love. What will you learn next? It all starts on Skillshare.
And this is what your references section looks like. It's titled References. It's positioned at the end of your paper, and the references subhead, is centered in the middle of the page, and you double space it. And so you note a couple things about this one. You have these, they're called hanging indents. You might think of them as backward paragraphs. So the first line hangs over the rest of the paragraph, and this makes it stick out. It's with the last name that sticks out that your references can be easily found. And you'll notice that and there's a few other things, and we'll go over those, but it's in alphabetical order by the last name of the writer, or the last name of the first author in case of multiple authors. And first names are not spelled out, but referred to by initials. And as I said, you invert the names, last name, first initials, you alphabetize it. And if you reference a source with an unnamed author, you use a word such as anonymous or unknown. You alphabetize the source by the title of the article. And this happens sometimes if you're referring to a website from a government website, and all you have to go on is maybe the title of the page, or maybe an editorial in a magazine or a journal. You have a title, and you reference it by that. Now, of course, you can also reference by what's called a corporate author, and I'll get to these again later, but that means the organization. So if you wanted to cite an article by the Center for Disease Control on the COVID-19, you could use the Center for Disease Control as the corporate author, as the organizational author. And in this case, the reference would be alphabetized by the first major word. That first major word is important because here you see that the World Health Organization is alphabetized under W, not the. We see here in the little illustration, World Health Organization is your reference, and not the World Health Organization. APA is a little funny about some of its rules, and I would say funky, funky monkey. It gets a little wild out there. But one of the rules is that you only alphabetize the first word or the first letter of the first word in an article, except for major words or words that would normally be capitalized, like you capitalize the United States, or Paris or England or something like that, but not other words. And so we see here an example, and I've outlined in red. Now, you don't put them in red in your paper, of course, but impact, I would be capitalized. Of COVID is always capitalized, so that's capitalized. And then lockdown on the incidence and mortality of acute exacerbations of none of the other words are capitalized, except after a major punctuation, in this case, a colon. So if you have a period or a colon in the middle of the title, and the use of the colon is very common in academic papers, then you capitalize that first word. You kind of start the game all over again. Maybe consider it the second half, and you start all over again. So National Interrupted Time Series Analysis 4, and then Scotland and Wales. Scotland and Wales being countries, always capitalized. Countries, so those are capitalized. That's for an article title. For a journal title, that is the name of the magazine or the journal, major words in that are capitalized. Journal of Religious Education, for instance. You see here, journal, religious, and education. Those are major words, those are nouns. Those are capitalized. The rules are, I hesitate to say inconsistent, but they're variable. So you have to spend a little time paying attention to that. Now, when you're putting all this together, while you're still learning it, or when you're first learning it, I would suggest having a guide next to you. So this is how I format this particular reference. This is how I format this other particular reference. So have a guide, either the APA manual, or you can find a lot of guides on the internet as well. You italicize the works of longer works, magazines, newspapers, and the titles of websites. So major works you italicize. The first example, a journal title, Nordic Journal of English Studies. Notice that that's italicized. Or a book's title, Where the Crawdads Sing. Notice APA's capitalization rule or exception to the rule or whatever comes into effect. You capitalize the words in a journal title, but not the words in a book title. But you italicize the book title. I don't make this up. A website, you italicize, justice served, first word capitalized, and then the first word after the colon capitalized, and then everything else lowercase. And you don't put quotes or underline or italicize the names of the articles themselves. Those don't take any special formatting. And a lot of times you have to come back to this. You have to say, how do I do this? Because oddly enough, sometimes I think APA is just messing with us. But the rules are slightly different whether you put these sources in your references page versus whether you put them in the body of your paper. But we'll get to that later. How do you figure out how to put together your reference list? First, you take a look at what type of source is it. Is it a book? Is it a journal article? Is it a web page? Is it Aunt Tilly's recipe box? One good way to do it is you find a sample of referencing this type of source in the textbook. A lot of times when you refer to a guide for how to format a reference, they will provide you examples. And a lot of times those examples are a lot clearer or a lot easier to follow than a verbal instruction. You take a look at, the picture, as it were, of what it's supposed to look like. And then you follow the instructions and mirror, that is, create a mirror image of the sample. And then, of course, when you finally put your references list together, make sure they're all in alphabetical order. We start with the basics of the references, which is a book. And I do this, or we start with the book, because it's the simplest. And it provides the template for everything else. Everything else kind of follows along this template, and you add stuff or maybe subtract something. But this gives you the basic idea. And I'll just say this. If you get the basics correct, you can't go too far wrong. Sometimes you're a little confused where to put the issue or the volume number. But if you remember the template for the book references, you won't go too far wrong. The first is the author. And remember, we don't use first names, and we put the last name first. Stoneman R. Stoneman R. His first name is, in this case, it's maybe Robert, Rachel, I don't know. But anyway. And then you have the name and the date of the reference. And that date is always attached to the name of the author. Okay, in APA, the date of publication is very important. It's wedded, it's welded, it's attached, it's stapled to the name of the author, and you've got to keep that there, and it's always in parentheses. So anyway, Stoneman R. 2008, and the name of the book, and remember, I said names of books are italicized, so Alexander the Great, and a new capitalization, A Life and Legend. Alexander the Great, Alexander and Great are capitalized because that's his name. He's known by Alexander the Great. Those are capitalized, and then A Life, first letter after the colon. and then Yale University Press, where it was published. This is the basic format for all references, and if you just remember this, you'll get a long way. Even if you get some of the technicalities incorrect, you'll have the basics. And you might get a few dings, but you have the basics. Now, I want you to do better than just have the basics. And I don't want you to get dinged, but at least get this down. If you have a source that is an article or a chapter in a larger collection, that is a chapter of an edited book, you again refer to the author of the article or chapter that you're referring to. Well, that's a little awkward, but you don't refer to the editors because you're not citing the entire book. So say you have a textbook and it's got a bunch of chapters written by different people. You are not referring to the entire textbook. You're referring to the one chapter. In this case, in the example that we have here, Armstrong D., that's the author of the chapter, 2019. It was published in 2019. And Mallory and Character, that's the name of the chapter. So note, not capital, not italicized, and only the first name is capitalized, and it's everything else is in lowercase, and not in italics, not in quotes. So where do you find it? Remember, the basic rule about references is that they have to guide the reader to easily locate your source. That's the purpose. Because your reader is sitting there going, this is fascinating. I want to know more about this. How do I find it? They go to your references page and you go, oh, this is where I find it. It's in this book. It's in M.G. Leitch, however you pronounce the name. Sorry to Mr. Leitch. And C.G. Rushton, editors. They're the editors of the book. In parentheses, a new companion to Mallory, and then the page numbers of the article. So you really walk the reader to the source. Oh, you want to know where I got this? Let me walk you over there. Okay, so 144 to 163, and then the publisher is D.S. Brewer. So again, last name of the author, date, title of the article, and then the source, in this case, the edited book. Sources found in a periodical. Now, many times, what we'll be referencing will be sources found in a periodical, and this means a journal or a magazine or a newspaper, maybe a trade publication. Same basic format. The author and the initials, and then if there's multiple authors, author A, author B, author C, and then the year. The title of the article, and then the title of the periodical. That is the title of the magazine or journal. And then the volume numbers, and in parentheses, the issue number. It could be volume 7, issue 3, the third issue in that volume, which is usually year by year. And then either the DOI or the URL. Now, one thing to watch out for is if you get your article from say a university database or some sort of database that requires an account. You don't want to give one of these 5-line URLs. Those are not helpful because if I want to find the article, I can't go to that URL because it's behind the wall, behind the paywall of the database. In that case, you give what's called the DOI number, if there is one. But if it's found on the open internet, on the wild and woolly internet, like the Wild West, right? Then you can give the URL. Okay. Well, here's an example. Burnt TJ 2002, in parentheses, the dates. So Burnt and TJ always go with 2002. And then the name of the article, Friendship, Quality, and Social Development. Notice nothing capitalized except the first letter of the title. No quotes, no italicization. And then the name of the journal, italicized, Current Directions in Psychological Science. 11, well, that's volume 11, page 7 to 10. Again, you want to give the pages. That's the format for the journal or a magazine or a newspaper, and etc., some sort of periodical. Again, the name of the author, the date, the name of the article, then the name of where to find the large publication in which you have found it. And in case of multiple authors, again, the first named author, Wegener DT and Petty RE, and so on and so forth. Now, the order in which you put the names in your reference is very simple. It's how they list them themselves. It's how the authors or the publisher list the names themselves. You don't shift the order around. So don't be confused by saying, oh, maybe I should put it in alphabetical order or something like that. Who's the most important? No. You put the names of the authors in the order that they list them themselves. They've already gone through all that. Okay. If you have a corporate or organizational author, this is an organization or a corporation or a government agency that publishes something, usually informational. So here we have an example, College of Licensed Practical Nurses of Alberta. So there's no individual author named. It was put together by the organization. Probably many people looked at it, approved it. It's an official statement or informational publication by the organization, and they are the author. And again, you follow the same format as with the other references. The name of the corporate author, and then the date, 2015 in this case, and then the name of the article. Complete profile for a competency profile for LPNs. What is that? Licensed professional nurse, I believe. And then where it was retrieved from. This was retrieved not behind a paywall, but from the open internet. So they published it for general consumption. In the case of a source from a library database, you avoid using the complete URL because that's like 5 lines sometimes, and your reader can't get to it anyway. You just say the name of the database in which you found it. In this case, the Libris ebook database, or it might be another popular database such as ProQuest. So, ProQuest database. If I am reading a paper and I want to find your paper or the source for your information in your paper, I would go to ProQuest and I'd put in my information so I can get into the library. It's like this. If you tell me that you got this information from a book on the 5th floor of the local downtown library, I have to go through the front door of the library and present my library card to get the book. I don't climb up the side of the wall and jimmy the window open to get into the 5th floor, right? I have to go through the front door. If I want to check out the book, I have to show my library card. I have to be a member of the library. The same thing with the databases, the online databases. I have to be a member in, maybe figuratively speaking, of the library in one way or another. Now, for a dictionary or encyclopedia entry, you order by a name of the article. The article, which is the article of the encyclopedia entry, or even if it's just a word definition. So you don't say the dictionary, the Merriam-Webster dictionary. You certainly don't say Wikipedia. And we'll talk about that in a different why not Wikipedia? Anyway, but even if you do use Wikipedia, you don't use the word Wikipedia. You source it by the name of the article. That's the title. That's using the title. That's the title format. We've talked about that before, right? Very often, for even encyclopedias, there's no named author, but you have again, it's a corporate author. Now, sometimes you will have, in more elaborate encyclopedias, you will have the name of an author. So you can use that. If Smith wrote this 5-page article in the Encyclopedia Britannica on whatever, on internet security, then maybe you could use Smith's name as the author of the article because it's given very often at the end of the article. But other than that, you'd be quite well served by using the name of the author, not the name of the encyclopedia or the dictionary as your first source. Now, if there's a case that it's not dated, you can use ND for no date, and then a Merriam-Webster dictionary or wherever you found it. If you found it on the internet, then you can use the URL. That's the case that you could use the URL. But the most important takeaway from this is you use the name of the article, the title of the article. So you just don't say, I found this in the dictionary. There's a million words in the dictionary. Where in the dictionary? Okay. Citations, in-text citations. A citation is where you give a short referral, or a short note where you got information in the body of your paper. It's in the body of your paper. It's not at the end of the paper in your references section. It's in the body of your paper, and it refers your reader to your references section. I want to read more about this article by Smith, 2013. How do I find it? And then you go to your references section. Then your reader goes to your references section and locates the exact specifics of the article and how to find that article in your references section. You use two major, sometimes three major pieces of information, and these are usually in parenthetical format. Use the author's last name, not the initials, but the author's last name, the date of the publication. Remember me saying the date is married to the last name of the author? And I'll show you how that's done in just a couple moments. But Smith, 2012, and if it's a quote, you include the page number where possible. Sometimes you might get a quote from a website and there are no pages, so that's not a problem. I mean, don't sweat it if there's no page available, but many of the things that you will read, even if you find them on the internet, will have pages attached, because many articles that you find on the internet taken from journals or magazines are really PDFs of the printed article. So there's page numbers attached. A couple different ways to do citations, and one is what's called an in-text citation. This is where you insert the name of the author or part of the reference into the body of your text, and so it flows evenly in the body of your text. Such as, first example, Carruth, 1996 in parentheses, states that a traumatic response frequently entails a, quote, delayed, uncontrolled, repetitive appearance of hallucinations and other intrusive phenomenon. And it's a quote, so you need the page number. You always need a page number for a quote. In this case, page 11. So note P period 11 in parentheses. And so here we split up the reference, or the citation, the citation, get my terminology straight. Carruth, parentheses, 1996, then at the end of the quote, page 11. The other way to do a citation, and this is for a quotation, is a traumatic response frequently entails a quote and then the entire quote, and then to the end of that you have the complete citation in parentheses. This is why it's called a parenthetical citation. The parentheses is the major source. So Carruth, 1996, page 11. Okay, so you have two different ways to give in-text citations. Okay, two major ways to give in-text citations. A paraphrase or a summary, you cite the entire piece, the entire paraphrase or the entire summaries. In this case, though feminist studies focus solely on women's experiences, they err by collectively perpetuating the masculine-centered impressions. In parentheses, Fussell, 1975, close parentheses, period. Period. The period goes outside the parentheses. I'm constantly marking that when I correct papers. People put the period inside or on the, what would that be, on the left-hand side of the parentheses, but the parenthetical citation is part of the sentence, part of your sentence. So it doesn't go inside the quotes, but it goes inside the sentence. So the end punctuation is at the end of is before the period, at the end of the sentence before the period. Now you notice that when you have a paraphrase or a summary, you usually don't use a page number. It's not necessary to use a page number. And again, this is an example of where, like with a quote, you can work the part of the citation into the body of the text. Recently, the history of warfare has been significantly revised by Huguenet et al., 1997. That's worked into the body of the text. That's part of your essay. Marcus, 1989, and Rate and Tate, 1997, to include, and then it goes on. We've worked the citation into the body of the text. The names, since they're part of your own writing, do not appear in parentheses, though the dates do. And then again, I can't stress this enough, the dates, the year of publication always goes with the name. It always goes to the name. That's how we know what the work is. In essence, it's like this. You're not really referring to a person an author, you're referring to the work. You're not referring to Higonet, I'm not sure what the pronunciation would be, but you're referring to Higonet 1987. The article written by a person by this name in 1987. That's the citation, and that's the method of referencing the article. When including the quotation in a summary or paraphrase, here you have a mixed bag. You're mixing paraphrase and quote. So you see I've marked off what's a paraphrase. Recently the history of warfare has been significantly revised by Higonet, Marcus, and Rayton Tate in the dates. And then a quote, according to feminist researchers Rayton Tate, quote, 1997, it is no longer true to claim that women's response to the war have been ignored. Close quotes, page 2, period. Well, you notice that when you have both a paraphrase and a quote, you have to treat them individually, and you do have to give the exact reference for the quote. Be very careful about that. In your in-text citations, use signal words or phrases, and this means according to X 2008, or X 2008 argued that, or wrote that. In APA, you always refer to the writing or the instance of saying something or claiming something in the past tense. You use the past tense because that's when they wrote it. They wrote it not now, but they wrote it in the past tense. You can use such verbs as wrote, acknowledged, contended, maintained, responded, reported, argued, concluded, found, or whatever. You use a verb. Smith, 1997, wrote. Smith, 1997, has written, or any other attribution there, any other verb that might be pertinent. Not Smith, 1997, writes. So not in the present tense, but in the past tense. Now, you have to use those signal words or phrases. I sometimes get something like this in my grading of papers, Smith, 1997, and then the quote. You're missing a verb. Smith what in 1997? Or Smith 1997 what? He wrote, he argued, he found, he denied, whatever it is. You have to put a verb in there. Just don't leave the verb out. You have to put a verb in there. Now, the distinction to be made is if the entire quote is referenced by a parenthetical citation that includes all the information, then you don't need a verb, right? But if you have in-text citation, that's where you work the name of the author into the body of your text. You need to say what the author did or wrote or whatever. This is what I was talking about. The presence of logical inconsistencies is a signal that the claim might be false. Smith, 1997, page 33. That is the entire citation in parentheses. And the quote stands by itself. Now, of course, you precede it with something and you follow with something, so it makes sense. So you explain what it is that it means. You explain the meaning and the significance of the quote. But this is a case where you don't have to say that Smith wrote something or claimed something or found something because you have the quote standing by itself. And again, sources in an edited book are treated somewhat similarly to the sources in an edited book in your references page. You don't refer to the editors. The editors of the book are not the author of the article. They have to make a distinction. Is the whole book written by somebody? If that's the case, then you cite that author. But if it's an edited book, that is, the editors put together many different sections or chapters written by different people, then you refer to the particular author that wrote the chapter. An article, in this case, over on the side, an article by A.P. Jones in a book edited by Smith and Collinsworth. So yes, Jones, 2008, wrote. So Jones, 2008 is your references, not Smith and Collinsworth. And perhaps 2008. The article was not written by the editors, Smith and Collinsworth. It is written by Jones. And sometimes you'll load up on your references, and this is good practice. If you have more than one source that affirms the truth, the veracity of your claim, of your evidence, that's good. Cockrell, 2005, Smith, 2008, both attest that, I don't know, the world is flat. You've got two references that prove the world is flat. And so anyway, please don't let that be a takeaway from this. I'm just making a joke. Anyway, but this is parenthetical. You state a fact, and then these two authors attest to that. They did similar studies or something like that. And something to watch out for. Again, APA is a little wonky. If you have two authors and you're referring to them in the body of your text, that is in your essay, in your paper, you use the word and, rate and Tate, in parentheses 1997. However, in your references page and in parenthetical citations, you use what's called the ampersand. That's that funny little squiggly thing that signifies and. You see the examples here. I told you, APA is funky. It's a funky monkey. It's very particular, and it keeps on changing things up. I personally think the authors of APA were on something when they devised this. How could we mess with people who are trying to use APA anyway? That's just my personal opinion. Anyway, please don't quote me. But anyway, this is a rule. It's probably a minor rule, but you can get dinged for it. So you just want to avoid as many red marks on your paper as you possibly can. Now, one place that APA gives you a break is in a work with three or more authors. You're able to use et al., the phrase et al., which means et alia. That means and all the rest, and a bunch of them. If you have three or more authors, you don't have to name all the authors, and this is a slight improvement from how it was previously. Previously, you had to, I think, you had to name up to 4 of them, or 5 of them, or 6 of them, or something like that, which got very cumbersome. But now, if it's 3 or more, you can just say et al. 1999, and that's the whole bunch of them, whether it's 3 or 4 or 5 or 10. Sometimes, there are papers, there are research papers that are put together by a whole team of people. So you have multiple authors, and you don't have to name all of them. Not in the citations. In the references section you do, but not in the citation, not in the body of your paper. And we come back to the organizational corporate authors. And again, sometimes a paper is authored maybe, by an organization or a corporation, putting out information, putting out a policy statement, or research finding. And so we see a couple examples here. The data collected by the Food and Drug Administration 2008 confirmed. So we refer to the Food and Drug Administration, and of course, that's how it's referred to, how the reference is referred to in your reference page. The Food and Drug Administration gets the credit as being the author, or the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, 2008 confirmed. Now, that FDA in parentheses is important. The first time you mention an organization that has an initial, you use the complete name of the organization. So in this case, the Food and Drug Administration. And then you put the initials, even if they're commonly known, you put the initials in parentheses, and then from then on in the paper, you can use the initials. So Food and Drug Administration, parentheses, FDA. And so you're kind of saying that from henceforth, when I use FDA in this paper, I mean the Food and Drug Administration. I don't mean the Federal Department of Authors. That's a different organization, but that's not what I'm referring to now. Because sometimes the same initials, the same acronym is used by different organizations. You want to be clear which one that's using, even if you think that it's well known. I would suggest doing the same thing with something as well known as the FBI or the CIA. Federal Bureau of Investigation, parentheses, FBI, and then from henceforth you can use FBI in your paper. And again, the works of an unknown author, not anonymous, okay? But if you wish to, you can use the title of the article. In this case, according to Indiana, joins Federal Accountability System, 2008, ... or in parentheses, the parenthetical, entirely parenthetical, Indiana, in quotes, that indicates the author. You refer to the title. Again, never anonymous, never unknown, or any word like that. Either the name of the organization that published it or the title of the article. And it's either one of those, whichever you use, be consistent, that is how you will list it in your reference page. Sometimes you will use personal communication. If you're writing a paper that you interview somebody, for instance, or you're taking a business class and you interview an executive in your company about the long-term prospects of the widget corporation, you can quote that person, but you don't include the reference or the citation in your references page. The purpose of the references page is that a person can go there and find published material. If it's not published, they can't find it. But you do refer to it in your paper, and this is how: personal communication and then the date. The quote here is, A.P. Smith also claimed that many of her students had difficulties with APA style. Parentheses, personal communication, November 3rd, 2002. And that's personal communication, whether it's an email or an interview or a phone call or whatever. Or E. Robbins, personal communication, January 4th, 2001, something like that. If it's all in parentheses, you could put the name in parentheses as well. And these are obviously two different instances of that. But you can include personal communications or interviews or whatever of unpublished material, but you don't in the body of your paper and your citations, but you don't include it in your references. Electronic sources, that's stuff that you find on the internet. You use the same format that we've discussed here. Now, sometimes if you have a long piece that you find on the internet, it doesn't have any pages, but you could refer to the paragraph. Paragraph 6, for instance. Now that helps the reader locate your quote or your information in the body of the web page, for instance. Maybe it's a very long web page. Or sometimes even in databases, you might find a single page that has an entire article. They haven't formatted it as a PDF, and there's no page numbers, and they just have the entire thing on a single web page. So you can refer to the paragraphs. In this case, you have to count down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, get the paragraph number. Or you could refer to the section 3 or something like that. But note that the URL is not included in the parentheses. You never include the URL in the parentheses in your in-text citations. Those go in the references section. Those are saved for the references section. Now, when in a pinch, sometimes you can't figure it out. And in this case, you won't go too far wrong. You might not be totally correct, but again, go back to the basics. Last name of the author, initial. This for the references. The date, the title of the work, and where you found it, whether it's the publication source. In this case, the Yale University Press, or it could be Journal of American Studies if it's a journal. So those basics, name, date, title, and source, or location, source or location, the location where it was found. If you can't figure out anything else, use that. Use that basic format. Go back to the basic format of the book. You won't be too far wrong. You might not be exact, but you won't be too far wrong. Everything else, all the other information fits in between, and you can throw it in or not. Of course, I'd recommend you look it up. You try to find the exact correct format. And in another lesson, I'll discuss a few aids that we have to format our references and citations. But even before we do that, I will say that it's best that you know this yourself, because sometimes those aids, those helpers, those little citation helpers don't get it right. And ultimately, you're responsible for the reference and the citation being right. But at least memorize the basic format. Last name, initial, date, title, location, or source. Remember those, and you won't go too far wrong. And of course, there's other APA references. Purdue OWL is great. You can just type in the search page, Purdue OWL APA, and they have a wealth of information. There's other internet sites, often sponsored by a college or university. In fact, your institution might have a page dedicated to directions for APA. There is the publication manual of the American Psychological Association, that blue book, that scary blue book that I showed you the cover of at the beginning of this lesson. You go to APA's own website. They have a lot of information there. They will help you. Sometimes you're writing textbooks. Sometimes your textbook. If you're taking a class, essay writing, research writing, whatever, they'll have a section on how to format for APA. And your instructor will tell you, I want you to use APA. Or if he tells you how to use another source and another lesson, I will give instructions on MLA, which is another major format, style format. Then you use that. In which case, you shouldn't be looking at this lesson. You should be looking at the MLA lesson, because I kind of repeat the same information, but only specifically tailored to MLA. Or you can use a citation generator. You'll find this in Microsoft Word. You'll find several of these in an online generator. You type in the name of the book. You say whether it's a book or an article or a web page, and then you type in the title and the author and the date and all that. So they have little boxes, little insert boxes for you. And again, I'll give a lesson on these. And now, of course, when you do those, you have to make sure you get the information correct, because it's still a stupid machine and it only knows what you tell it, garbage in, garbage out. But you can use that as well. So you have a lot of sources to help you. And what I've attempted to do in this lesson is just give you a start. Give you a start to do successful citations in your papers, and whether they're essays or they're full-fledged research papers, well, this gets you started. All right. I didn't know where to go with that sentence, but anyway, good luck. Talk to you soon.